Well, hello there, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Future Sight, which is, of course, a soundproof podcast production. Hopefully, you know us by now. My name is Brendan. I go by Mr. BDog46 in most forums on the internet that I want to be found. And next to me today is, of course, Jake, who goes by Major Bowman. I don't know whether or not he wants to be found. I only speak for myself in that regard.
Depends
We're
on the
back
day.
here with just depends on the day and by who, I guess. Is
True.
an important an important piece of the puzzle there. But we're back here with another episode of Future Sight, which is, of course, our ongoing series where we review old VGC matches. So far, we've done, a pretty good chunk of matches that hold some kind of like place in VGC history. So we'll probably be sticking to that for the most part until given a reason not to. And the match that we have today comes to you from the year of our Lord 2018, and is actually one of the matches that I think was pretty highly requested, and I don't know, like I feel like it has kind of a cult following, is that there are people that will come at you and be like, I could tell you immediately what the best match I've ever seen is, and it's this one. And I've heard that from a couple people. This is not like an isolated phenomenon. So we figured we'd bring it to you this week. And the match is a Worlds 2018 match. It comes from day 2 of Swiss, and it's the final round, so the winning in between Brendan Zheng and David Koutesh.
Yeah, two players that are pretty much household names at this point. David's been one of the best players in Europe for quite a while. A lot of times he's known for creating more unique teams, but like unique teams that work. It's like you'll see a lot of random stuff in his teams that a lot of times you would never expect to be like successful in any kind of format. But the way he like builds his teams and plays them, that's a big part of it too, obviously. But he's very good at like finding things that work for him, which is pretty cool. I think he embodies the idea that you just want to like counter meta every time, I think. And he's good at picking out what's good at that. And obviously Brendan's someone that we've seen around for a while. Junior Worlds champ, had done really well in Masters after that too. Caught a couple regionals. Day 2 of NAIC, I know. We know Brendan.
We do, yeah, we do. And important to note that he is like an extremely good player in his own right, and not simply like the Babytron. And this is kind of like his probably his strongest Masters performance is this event here. Although day 2 NAIC was obviously like a big one, and interestingly enough, Jake and I actually both played him at NAIC in 2018. So that's a fun little tidbit. That's like one of the few events that I've ever like had a reasonable record at. So there you go. But yeah, so both really good players. They're both kind of like I don't know. I think of them as kind of like the younger generation of VGC Masters, but you and I are like old heads at this point. But like
we're
like
having
medium
known, heads.
Right. But having known these players when they were like influential seniors. Kind of makes me think of them as kind of like young up-and-comers and masters at this point, even though they're basically like pretty well established at this point. So let's talk a little bit about teams and like the state of the metagame here. So for anybody that is like kind of remembering 2018 Worlds, it was pretty diverse. It was really diverse. There wasn't really anything that was particularly centralizing. There were a handful of archetypes that were like kind of running around and pretty well known. But these are both pretty unique teams in their own right, even kind of like separated from what was going on in the rest of the meta. Is that you would see a lot of teams that would like run like Tefini, Ensign, like some sort of speed control, and then a Mega, and that was kind of like the core that people would build around. And these are a little bit of a departure from that, and you can kind of see by looking at them that they are built with that kind of like Ensign, Fini, Landorus defensive core in mind.
Yeah, I think that was something that, like you said, it was a pretty diverse meta, even throughout the whole year. There were rarely times where one or two teams or archetypes were just dominating everything. I think the one you could maybe argue was like the Metagross Tapu Fini stuff.
I was just gonna say that, yeah.
But even then, that was more of just like a really solid team and never like a huge dominant force. But if you look at these two teams, they're both pretty prepared for that kind of archetype. Brendan's first, like he has Tapu Koko, which deals with Fini well. Kartana deals with the Fini and Landorus well. Salamence does really well into like Incineroar, Landorus. Like it's a lot of these things beat two of the big three being Tapu Fini, Incineroar, Landorus, and Nidoqueen, which is a cool tech there, beats all three, which is fun.
Yeah, Nidoqueen's kind of a fun Pokemon, right? Because it's one of those things where like if you had like very little knowledge of like competitive doubles or something like that, and somebody was like, "Hey, you need to come up with a Pokemon that beats Salamence, Tapu Fini, and Incineroar," you'd be like, "Oh, well, Nidoqueen hits all three of those for super effective damage, so give it a Life Orb and Sheer Force, and like there you go." So it's funny because it basically like fills that role, is that it puts pressure on the defensive backbones of like the teams that were being built around this time. So that's pretty much what's going on there. I think Clefairy was something that Brendan was playing with for like most of the latter half of the season, because I know he had it at NAIC, but he was running Metagross, I believe, at NAIC,
That
if
sounds
memory
right.
serves. So he had like a couple pieces of that team in place already that he was familiar with, but switched it up. And Nidoqueen was kind of like a little bit of a flavor of the month thing after it had a big showing at Japan Nationals that year. I think it won the event. Jake and I were trying to remember this earlier.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was either first or second, and I'm pretty sure it won the event.
It sounds right. If you look at David's team too, Nidoqueen can hit everything on the team for super effective damage.
Yeah,
given that it has
definitely.
Ice Beam, but it always does.
It always does. It always
so
does.
that it's uniquely threatening to a team like this because nothing is safe against it. Landorus obviously can outspeed it. If Nidoqueen takes a little bit of chip damage, Landorus can knock it out. But something like Zapdos cannot touch Nidoqueen. Serena,
nope.
You can Power Whip it, but you take a ton from Sludge Bomb. Blaziken, same kind of deal. You can Flare Blitz it, but you'll get knocked out by Earth Power. There's a lot of things here that really don't want to take a single attack from Nidoqueen.
Definitely. So it's really hard to switch into and puts on a lot of pressure pretty much always.
Yeah.
So then on the other side, we'll talk a little bit about David's team. Is Blaziken Bisharp was kind of like this like niche counter meta archetype that had been around for like part of the season, and it's like pretty much exactly what you think it is. Is like it's just Blaziken and Intimidate Deterrent. Like that's it's like it's that simple, right? And then Bisharp, like at +1, puts a lot of pressure on the stuff that wants to try and switch into Blaziken all the time, and then it kind of is just like a pretty common supporting cat, like with the exception of Serena, but like Zapdos and Fini and Landorus were all around pretty commonly in some capacity here. And it kind of makes sense to see all of them with Blaziken kind of like filling the fire type role that Incineroar has on like every other team. Then you can just kind of run Landorus for Intimidate and some pivots, like a defensive backbone, right? Is that's kind of the one thing about Blaziken Bisharp is like you don't really get to make switches unless you fill out the rest of your team with stuff that's pretty bulky.
Yeah, I like the way that David put this team together too, because I feel like it supports the Blaziken really well, even beyond just like Intimidate Deterrent. A lot of times, like the way you beat Blaziken is either to attack it before it can speed boost or to just stomach a hit from it, which isn't super easy because it's pretty strong. And he has Tailwind Zapdos, which can give you like the speed on the turns while you're speed boosting to kind of ramp up. And you also have Serena, which is nice because it blocks any kind of priority. So like if you want to try to fake out the Blaziken, you can't do that. If you want to Mach Punch it, but like you can't use priority attacks when Blaziken's on the field, or when Serena's on the field rather. Plus Serena and Zapdos both take care of water types pretty easily too, which is probably the best way to beat Blaziken, just generally speaking. Like defensively or offensively. So I think this it's just a neat construction here, and Tapu Fini is just kind of a solid glue Pokemon. I don't think you can ever put Tapu Fini on a team and make it worse.
Yeah, I think that's probably true in most scenarios. Like I'm sure we could think of something to make it worse, but for the most part, Tapu Fini is just like, and Tapu Fini Landorus in particular is just kind of like you can jam that onto any team and have it be pretty successful. Okay, we've talked about what's going on here enough, so let's go ahead and jump into the game. We've got leads up on the screen here. And we've talked at length about Tapu Koko being basically like an infallible lead, although it wasn't really as omnipresent as it was in some of the other metagames we've discussed, especially 2017.
Yeah.
But like a pretty safe lead from David's side as well, as he's going with presumably a Sash Bisharp, so you're not really expecting to lose it without doing something. And then Zapdos, which can like set up Tailwind for whatever's in the back.
Yeah, that's a pretty free Tailwind. There's no way that Tapu Koko gets knocked out there. There's no way Zapdos gets knocked out there unless the Koko is Z, but on a team with Kartana, you pretty much expect the Kartana to be the Z move every time. So really safe Tailwind. You sacrifice the Bisharp for Iron Head damage on Snorlax, which I think that had to be predicting something switching in. Maybe the Clefairy, just to eat the knockoff. Because a knockoff into Snorlax is a pretty, like, like a level 0 move there if you just want to make sure it's not going to be able to recycle. But either way, a decent turn 1 for both, I would say, just because you get the Blaziken in with Tailwind right away, so you don't have to worry about speed boost on the first couple turns. But you also get rid of the Bisharp, which is kind of a big deal for the Snorlax in that you don't have to worry about getting knocked off anymore, which is nice.
Right, so you're like basically stacking into like perfect Blaziken position, but you know for sure that Salamence is coming in this turn, and now your Intimidate to turn is gone. So Blaziken's kind of like going to be fighting an uphill battle here, as it does not really any damage at all at -1 into Salamence, even though it hasn't even Mega Evolved yet. And then an offensive Z move from Zapdos, which is actually like pretty cool. This I think at some points in the season it was running Gigavolt Havoc, but more often it was running some sort of like Pinch Berry, or you saw it with like Misty Seed every now and again. But you see immediately Brendan just drops 2 switches and like seizes offensive momentum, and like it's gone.
Yeah, that was pretty immediate. I think David there, when you're running a team like Blaziken Bisharp, and especially when you have like superior board position for a second, you really have to keep your foot on the gas pedal. And I think what David was doing there is trying to predict switches in the opposite slots. So like he went to Flare Blitz to Kartana, which covered a Coco switch, trying to eat a superpower. He Thunderbolted the Gigavolt Havoc to the Snorlax, trying to catch the Salamence coming in on superpower. I think he was just trying to get off a bunch of damage there, and it would have worked nicely if they had swapped those positions. But I think that damage on the Tapu Koko gives away that it's Assault Vest too. Given we also see Skydrop, that is definitely Assault Vest, because no Coco runs Skydrop without Vest.
Yeah, it's exclusively on Vest, and that's a pretty cool option that kind of pops up every now and again, right, where it gives you like 1 turn to set up, or like a way to burn a turn of Trick Room. So it's a pretty cool tech that is kind of around, but obviously it's not doing any damage here to the flying types. It's just kind of like removing them from play for a turn. The last, what else? Oh yeah, he takes Snorlax's Berry and gets a nice little paralysis, for the road. But Landorus here now in like a pretty good position.
Yeah, this can't really be known yet just based on what's gone down in the game, but the Landorus is Choice Scarf, which we're seeing right now. Tailwind did peter out, but the Landorus still outspread the Tapu Koko, which means that it obviously is Choice Scarf. And again, David trying to capitalize on
to read the switch.
What would have been a defensive switch there, like a Tapu Koko switching into a Salamence to avoid a ground type move is something that you'll see on a lot of teams that have Tapu Koko and Salamence, just because it's so easy to do. But Landorus, David there, again, he's like down a Pokemon, and he's just lost Tailwind. His Zapdos is pretty low now. He kind of has to start making these moves, or else it's going to be pretty difficult for him to win. So I respect that.
Right, and kind of like you said earlier, Jake, it's also just like the way that you have to play hyper offense teams. Especially when you feel like you're in some sort of offensive position, and especially from behind, you really have to start like kind of getting big with your plays in order to try and get the offensive momentum back that these kinds of teams thrive on. So you understand the play, although it kind of like looks strange in hindsight. You can totally see what he was going for there.
Yeah, it's still a pretty rough spot for David though, just because the Zapdos has 1 more attack at most, and the Blaziken can only target one of these things at a time. This is a pretty... I do like this switch, though. This is, I would say, pretty unpunishable, just because the Landorus isn't going to get knocked out by anything here. We know that Coco's Vest. We've now seen all 4 moves, and so we don't... It's unlikely that it would be able to knock out the Blaziken with something like a Volt Switch out of terrain. So you get rid of Snorlax, you get rid of something that... you start evening the Pokemon numbers, and now, especially because the Salamence is on the field, the Tapu Koko is a little bit less safe against this Landorus anymore.
Yeah, definitely, and actually kind of like a relevant Electroweb miss there, is that Salamence would have been able to take the field and be faster than Blaziken for a turn, had it hit the Electroweb, so now the position is a little bit different. And I think one of the things, we haven't really touched on it yet, but the third move on Blaziken can be like a million different things. People are running like Rock Slide, Thunder Punch, Swords Dance. I think it gets Earthquake, so like it could be anything, and like be threatening damage onto like any number of different Pokemon. We just don't really know what it is.
Yeah, that's a huge survival from Salamence there. That has to be on the bulkier
game
end.
Changer. Yep.
Yeah, because that's like the knocking out the Zapdos there means that you're like, I don't know, not knocking the Zapdos. Surviving that means that you now still have a Pokemon advantage here, and I believe there's still 1 or 2 more turns of Tailwind, so you still have to worry about the Blaziken, but that's so big.
yeah, and I think, I don't know. People always talk about how metas. Oh, there's Rock Slide, by
Yeah.
the way. How metas get bulkier
Uh-huh.
as the format goes on, and that people come into Worlds with very like specifically trained teams to like survive specific things. So I think it's reasonable to expect that there was a little bit of bulk built into that Salamence, although obviously he wasn't like trying to survive Landorus, Hidden Power Ice, or anything like that.
Yeah. This is now an interesting spot because the Blaziken is at +1, I believe. It should be +1. But Brennan
Yep.
did just get Tailwind up.
Yeah.
Is it 1? It should be, because it just switched in. It switched in the turn before.
I'm pretty sure.
Is it 2?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
I don't know. Tailwind's up. Brendan just got Tailwind up. He's got 3 turns of that. In Kartana, we haven't seen his Z move yet. Most likely Grass Sea, which should be able to knock out the Landorus and would clear out the Blaziken too. But the Landorus, like, I think Landorus eating a Grassium or a Bloom Doom is kind of the win con here because we know that Coco cannot damage Landorus now. It's shown Volt Switch, Electroweb, Nature's Madness, and Skydrop, none of which will actually finish off Landorus if it's ever like at low HP. And so Landorus, even though it kind of missed that KO on Salamence, it's still a pretty big pin here because Brendan has to worry about covering both while still not like taking a bunch of damage in the Blaziken at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. So there's like win condition, like a handful of win conditions for both players, but like really what you're looking at is like the Kartana damage.
Yeah.
We saw like a pretty key survival already, and Landorus can survive Bloom Doom, especially at -1. But as Jake said, this is, well, not only is it Choice Scarf, but it's also running a mix set.
Yeah.
I believe, so it's possible that it could just be like a minus defense nature, and it just doesn't even matter.
Yeah. I think their Kartana's not even at -1 though. It just came in now.
Oh, did it just come in? I missed it. Yeah.
So kind of revolves around that. It's interesting too because we don't even know if Blaziken gets knocked out by anything Tapu Koko can do, and so if Brendan doesn't target the Blaziken with something, if he doesn't go with that protect, there's still a chance that Blaziken fires off a move here. But Bloom Doom does come out, obviously going to be into that Landorus slot, and being a Kartana neutral attack, attacking a non-bulky Landorus, it's going to drop. Like this is one of the reasons you run Bloom Doom is because you get this knockout.
So there it is, and then you're relying on a misplay at this point, but I think that anytime Tapu Koko gets to Skydrop, you just win, right? I'm pretty sure that's how that goes from here.
Possibly, yeah. The thing is, I don't know if Skydrop even KOs. Like maybe it does after Superpower, or that's actually how you win Double Protect. So it was at +2 that turn, but Tailwind was still up, so it was going to be slower than either. So that Double Protect kept David in the game. And now it's kind of a unique spot where you have Rock Slide, which if you have to bail out and Rock Slide and hope for a flinch, that's what you do. But if you think that Blaziken can survive an attack from the Koko, given that it's probably not invested in either special attack or attack, this is your play. Like you have to go for this superpower because Kartana will knock you out no matter what. And there's a slight chance you can take something from the Koko.
I don't think it does, especially at -1, but it is not stab, and Tapu Koko is not going to have, it's going to be minus attack nature, right? So, like, all the conditions are in play for you, maybe to survive it, but after a superpower, I don't think so, right? Oh, it actually does?
Yeah,
oh
Koko is at, like, -1 or 2, I think.
I'm forgetting
which is the only reason why that happened.
Yeah.
I was watching this earlier, and Aaron Zheng was casting this, and he went absolutely insane when the
his brother's playing.
Yeah, rightfully so, but, that was pretty big, right? I think David knowing that the Koko's taken an Intimidator too, just recognizing that that's like the only way that Blaziken can survive is if Brendan goes for Skydrop probably. And you can't Flare Blitz. Like if you Flare Blitz, you're going to take too much damage to recoil and get knocked out by anything. So Superpower or Rock Slide and Prey is your only answer there. And I guess I don't know if that's a calc you have in your head. Like, oh yeah, the normal Koko Skydrop damage into Blaziken is XYZ. Like maybe he has some concept of that. Absolutely not. No. Maybe David has some concept of that, but either way, even if he had no idea how much damage that would have done, I think that was the correct play, just because it gives him that specific out. Whereas you never attack the Koko there. Like that, at least that was the smart part.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Obviously he plays to his 1 out, and I think it's kind of interesting to see like this team just consistently, it's just like it can generate offensive pressure just like at any moment by having Blaziken on the field, which is like pretty insane. Like, that doesn't. I don't know. That's not like a profound statement, right? Is there are a lot of Pokemon that generate offensive pressure by being on the field, but it's like after you saw Brendan like blow a Blaziken attack plus a Z move on turn 2 and still just be like consistently under duress from this Blaziken kind of gives like a pretty good idea of how like threatening it is. Okay, so we're going into game 2 here, I think. Yeah. Okay, there it is. So in between games, I mean, you kind of have an idea of like everything is just kind of like, okay, can I slow down Blaziken enough to stop it from sweeping me?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like Brendan's win condition, and David knows that like the Blaziken is going to be the Pokemon that's generating the majority of his offense, with really the only other Pokemon that like really matters is being able to get like a hidden power ice onto Salamence, assuming that it's like the same Pokemon brings, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what both players are going to be thinking about here is like being able to have defensive switches into Blaziken basically available at all times, and then David trying to get his Blaziken into position to like be able to click Flare Blitz into like slots that don't have any defensive maneuvering available.
Yeah, and I think for that reason, not leading Blaziken is just really smart, especially because there's something on Brendan's team that is such a good stopgap to Blaziken in the form of Salamence. Like, Salamence switches in on anything, even Rock Slide at -1 is really not going to do much to it. And so making sure you keep that Blaziken in the back so you can bring it in when you know it's going to have a better spot is really smart. To the same end, I think leading Bisharp is really smart as well, just because you do catch a Salamence if that does get led. But if you look at the rest of Brendan's team, like, there's not a whole lot, other than Kartana, obviously, that can immediately deal with the Bisharp. It's going to be faster than the Nidoqueen, most likely, because I don't think they're ever going to run like max speed on Nidoqueen. And Clefairy obviously doesn't want to take an Iron Head. Knockoff threatens everything except Salamence on this team and Kartana on this team pretty heavily. I just think it gives you immediate pressure while covering for a potential Salamence lead, even though that's kind of not really the main purpose for it.
Yeah,
I would say.
Definitely agree. All right, so let's roll tape here. So Tapu Koko, we're not surprised to see that. Now, do we know that this is Hidden Power Ice at this point, right?
On Landers?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, it's Choice Scarf.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Like it's been revealed speed-wise. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is like an attempted double tap into Snorlax, which I think is actually like kind of a smart play, right? Because that's almost not what you're expecting, especially with Tapu Koko sitting there on the field.
Yeah.
But I think that without a boosting item, it probably takes with an Assault. Does it take an Earth Power with Assault Vest? I feel like it must.
Koko? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Assault Vest. And even then, though, I like that play that David made just because, again, you on one hand, you're trying to read a switch again, which doesn't pan out this time. But even if you don't get that switch right, you're still going to do a bunch of damage with that assurance. And so it's a pretty safe play there, in the sense that you cover options that Brendan has defensively. Protect, I don't think, was super common on Snorlax at this time, especially given that Snorlax already showed high horsepower. Like, I think a lot of times if you have Protect, it's in lieu of high horsepower because you're going to run like mono return. So that in theory was a really safe play just to get damage on Snorlax. Protect coming in there, very handy for Brendan though.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, an insane play by Brendan, right?
Yeah.
To get Bisharp Sash and also not take a double target, and then get Kartana in here for free. Like it's locked into Snorlax or Landers is locked into Earth Power now, so we know that it's not gonna be able to knock Kartana out with that, and it's gonna get knocked out by a Bloom Doom instead, which seems to be what's going to happen here, although Bisharp is also threatened, which could potentially make David play a little bit more passively with that Pokemon, but instead it's just going to take the Landorus, which seems pretty smart and makes Salamence's day a whole lot better, and like potentially in the end game or at any point in the game is going to make David rely on like Rock Slide to knock out Salamence, which is never really a good option.
Yeah, I think getting a Landers there is huge. One for the Salamence, like you mentioned, but two for the Tapu Koko, because nothing else on David's team threatens like a lot of damage right off the bat into Koko. And so I think, especially if you look at like what could have come in on the Bloom Doom, Blaziken would take 1 million. If Zapdos is a last, it would also take 1 million. If it's offensive Zapdos, which with the Z move, it likely is at least a little bit offensive. And possibly the Feeney's there. I wouldn't have expected the Feeney given that the Coco Cartana would have been on the field pretty much the whole time. So it's just like an easy Bloom Doom there to take out what was a big threat. Potentially get a bunch of damage on something coming in, but ended up not happening.
Alright, and Blaziken's going to just leave itself open here, which I think is pretty important to do with this Pokemon when it's available. Kartana's going to get itself up to +2 and then trade itself, but it's like basically done its job. If it's able to take Landorus and then get knocked out in exchange while also getting damage onto Blaziken with a flare, like that's a pretty good trade for Kartana. I think you take that 10 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Zapdos is the third. I like, because the Snorlax is in the back with not too much health left. I do think there are still win cons for David here. But the Coco is going to be a big issue because Flare Blitz isn't going to knock it out. The Zapdos can't really knock it out. There's no way Coco goes down in one turn without a critical hit, especially because the Salamence is going to be able to cycle Intimidate pretty well here. So the Blaziken has to deal with the Coco, but also can't really ignore the other slot because the Salamence can knock it out in one shot, and the Snorlax will do a lot of damage with high horsepower or even frustration too, or return, whichever.
Right, and it looks kind of like David is just going to go ahead and like Gigavolt Havoc the Salamence and be like, surely he'll leave it open and like let me back into the game, which is clearly not what's going to happen. And Snorlax is going to come in and actually take like a pretty decent amount of damage, but like having a full health Salamence in the back, it's going to get to come back in here like if it wants to, and Blaziken's never really going to get the opportunity to be doing any sort of damage like at any point for the rest of the game. So it's basically just going to be like sitting there next to Zapdos and like clicking Rock Slide and hoping that Zapdos is going to be, you know, the Pokemon that's doing the majority of the heavy lifting here.
Yeah, I mean, you see that Rock Slide, that's still not too much damage, and that's like base Salamence too before it like Mega Evolves and gets the extra defense. So it's such Salamence is like one of the best classic answers to Blaziken. I guess in the days post Hidden Power Ice Blaziken from like 2015.
Okay, sure.
Well, because it wasn't Mega at that point. It was always like, it doesn't matter.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot that was kind of like a niche thing in 2015. It was like Greninja Light.
Yeah, Greninja Light.
Yeah, so there's that's actually kind of like a good thing to see is how much damage Skydrop actually does to Blaziken, so that there's actually like such a niche set of conditions where David actually wins game 1. But yeah, even that Thunderbolt's not doing enough damage, so even though like, you know, Zapdos is the biggest damage threat on the field right now, it's just not enough to be able to like take on 3 Pokemon by itself.
Yeah.
So that is game 2, and the key there was basically just kind of like the offensive positioning with Kartana and like all of the momentum that was taken very early by blowing that double target into like what's presumably like a reveal of Protect on Snorlax, and then like the turn 2 positioning, and then like turns 2 and 3 basically seal the game for Brendan like very early on. And like you said, there's always kind of like a niche set of win conditions, especially when there's Rock Slide available at your disposal, but that is like a very specific set of win conditions, and Brendan was like pretty much in the driver's seat from turn 2. But plays it out very safely.
I think one thing that these two games have both been characterized by so far is like David trying to go for big plays, except those big plays also have a layer of safety to them. So like, especially, I keep saying it, but on a team like this, that's kind of what you have to do, is you have to be the one taking the initiative to make plays, get damage on the field as quickly as you can, just because you're not going to win a war of attrition with a team with Blaziken. It's just not how a team like that is going to be set up, especially when you're Zapdos, which is sometimes kind of like the bulky linchpin of a team is Z-move, not like a seed or a berry. And so I think if David finds ways to make those, I don't like the word like reads, like he made a read, like I don't know, that feels like it's doesn't give the person doing it enough credit sometimes.
Yeah, it's reductive,
just because,
for sure.
Yeah, just because like, a lot of these reads that David's been making are like, if they go wrong, like worst case scenario, you still don't lose a whole lot. And so that's the kind of play that I think David needs to keep finding. And maybe like eventually they probably pay off. Like if you're David, you have played this team so much, knowing that those are the kind of plays you make, that you find the right opportunities to take them, and that's how you win games.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's like a game plan behind it. It's not just like people that are like leading 2 Z moves and like picking which one to use into which slot and stuff like that, where that's kind of like the crackhead like hyper offensive play that you see like kind of at your local PCs and stuff like that, and that is not this, and is like certainly reductive of David's ability as a player overall. And I think a lot of times, and this is kind of the case for hyper offense, right, where the idea is basically that you're like attacking first with strong attacks. You're always putting so much pressure on your opponent. Like you're putting more pressure on your opponent to make the correct move with the way that you like are positioned and the way that your team is constructed. So like a lot of times you just I don't know, what am I saying? So you can click your attacks, right? But the onus is on your opponent to like figure out what's coming.
Yeah.
And Brendan has obviously done a really like good job at that. But you force your opponent immediately to play defensively, and that can be an advantage in and of itself. I think that's what I meant to say.
Yeah, no, it's something you can definitely capitalize on. Like a lot of times, if you're playing safe, you're not gonna be as proactive. You're gonna be a little bit more reactive, and that gives a team like David's or a player like David the chance to come up with these bigger plays. Just because he has the space to do so. I like that point.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're into game 2 here. We know pretty much that David is going to be leading with his bishop pretty much always to deter any sort of intimidate, and that's kind of like his best way to generate offensive pressure, be it with assurance or like a knockoff into one of those slots. And Tapu Koko is actually going to take damage on turn 1 here, where like... David has decided that he does want to make sure that he's getting a damage into that slot, but again, a really nice switch by Brendan, and it kind of like illustrates why Tapu Koko with Volt Switch is like such an influential Pokemon.
Yeah, it's still kind of a tough spot though, because like depending on how the Kartana is trained, Earth Power does a lot. Like Kartana does not have special defense, especially if David was to call something like a Sucker Punch Earth Power into that slot, Kartana drops. Especially with Defiant Boost coming in here. So a little bit of a immediate like tough pin position. No Sucker Punch coming out. Oh my gosh. Oh no.
He did it again.
Yeah, that's twice. Again. Yeah, that.
Yeah, so that's pretty insane.
Oh, God.
But it's a good point that you bring up is that like Special Landorus definitely has these like conditions, especially into Kartana, where it can be like a pretty threatening damage option. And obviously like it seems kind of like David's team is constructed such that like Landorus is never really going to be one-hit KOing Pokemon, but with Blaziken and then obviously Assurance Bisharp and Sucker Punch Bisharp as an option, there's like a bazillion different like double taps that are going to knock out pretty much every Pokemon in the meta, or even in the game. And then here you kind of like see the pitfall of only getting one of those attacks off.
Right. I mean, even here you still threaten the Kartana and Koko with Earth Power. They're both in range for 1 Earth Power. Oh, was that Stone Edge?
Yeah, Stone Edge Salamence.
Oh god.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, super interesting. And like a lot of warning track power, but also it's like in range of a Kartana KO now, so like extremely important damage.
It is, but the Tailwind there means that Kartana is not going to be a problem for the next few turns. Like obviously it'll drop to any attack from either Zapdos or Landorus. And given that the Landorus is locked into Earth Power, like the Z move from Zapdos shouldn't be able to knock out the Salamence just because we already know that it's on the bulkier end from that hidden power damage. And so the Salamence is going to be able to fire off something like a Frustration or Stone Edge. I feel like from this point, Frustration knocks out the Zapdos. And if you are able to get the Zapdos this turn, that means that Landorus is locked into Earth Power for the rest of the game. Which, obviously, if you're Brendan, you love, because that means it cannot touch the Salamence.
Right, definitely. So the Z move here, like this is basically the best offensive position that we've kind of seen David have like the entire set here.
Yeah.
Landorus is like actually like clicking attacks meaningfully and doing damage. It just took a knockout. It's threatening super effective damage onto Nidoqueen, although potentially might not knock it out because I'm pretty sure these are like modest bulky ones here.
Even though Nidoqueen's got some pretty good like natural bulk, and Landorus isn't that like strong. it definitely knocks out Nidoqueen.
Right. Yeah, so I think that this is like kind of an interesting position because we know Kartana's in the back, and basically like you have to get Kartana's Z move off to win the game. Is basically like the way that I'm thinking about it, but it's kind of like Brendan. I feel like you do. Do you not? Like you have 3 Pokemon left.
Like at this point, the Landorus can't touch Salamence.
Oh, it's slower. It's slower because Tailwind just went up. Okay, yeah.
Well, even though
is it faster than Nidoqueen right now? Is it faster than Nidoqueen, or is Nidoqueen faster
than Blaziken or Landorus?
No. Then Landorus.
Let's try Scarf. Their Tailwind's matched, but Brendan's Tailwind went up first. So like the Blaziken's never going to touch the Nidoqueen this turn because it's going to be knocked out by Frustration, and then Landorus can't touch Salamence at all. Like at this point, you have to. Because I think this is the turn when Tailwind runs out for David. If not, it's 1 turn later.
It just happened, right? It just happened. Your Tailwind petered out.
I don't think it did. I think
I
that was
just
a
I
speed
just
boost.
saw. No. I just did Tailwind not just peter out? I swear I just saw Tailwind peter out.
Either
Am I
way,
crazy here?
no, it definitely it didn't because David wouldn't have protected.
Oh, because he
otherwise.
double protect. Yeah.
So yeah, either way, like at this point, it's just can you knock out Blaziken before it can like Flare Blitz Nidoqueen
Okay.
or something.
I just miscounted Tailwind turns, I think. But I got super lost somewhere in there. I'll have to go back and watch that again.
Anyway,
it happens on stream sometimes.
I know.
But anyway, yeah, I guess eventually it comes down to a double protect. Did I just lost a turn somewhere? Is that what happened? Because Zapdos definitely Tailwinded, right?
Yeah, it did. The first turn it was on the field. And then it Thunderbolted. It Z-moved and then Thunderbolted again?
So I was just a turn behind on that Tailwind.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel better now that at least I know what happened. Did I fudge it? Yeah, but at least
I think I'm the one that fudged it though. I saw Tailwind was still up. I think it did actually run out.
It did.
Yeah. So you were right.
It had to have. Okay.
Either way though, I think if the Blaziken, even if Blaziken hits a double protect there, like you still have to rely on the Earth Power knocking out Nidoqueen, which I really don't think it does, because Nidoqueen's generally pretty bulky and they're not going to run zero bulk, and like Landorus Earth Power is decently strong, but like there's no way it knocks out Nidoqueen in one hit, and so at that point you like have to rely on getting a Flare Blitz off on Nidoqueen too, but that also leaves you open to getting Frustration by Salamence, which is an auto win because again Landorus was not able to hit the Salamence at all, and so I think
so it would have just been a Rock Slide endgame.
Pretty much, yeah. And I think we saw both the use case and the pitfalls of Scarf Landorus in this match, just because it was that immediate pressure on both the Koko and the Kartana, given how much damage it does to Kartana. But you do end up in a scenario like this where there's a decent number of ground immune Pokemon that are pretty popular in the format, and especially on a team like this where you need a lot of help with Salamence. You got locked into that Earth Power and were never able to find a turn to switch out, and so that gave Brendan a lot clearer of an end game than he could have otherwise.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it being like a special Scarf Landorus is also kind of a unique case in and of itself, because it's like not something that we think about that much. I guess is that there are some that were like physical or mixed rather, but like a true special Scarf Landorus is also like kind of a whole different set of conditions that you almost don't even think about. And obviously it had to be Earth Power for it to even be like relevant in this match, or Kartana like barely even matters because you're like super powering and then you cease to be a Pokemon for the rest of the game. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's kind of always been that way too, right? Like Scarf Landorus, every time it exists, it's just kind of like it has those moments where you click Earthquake 3 times and win the game, right. Or you just like get to a point where you can go no further. And it being like directly checked by opposing Landorus is like one of the most interesting things about.
Well, that's why
about like the dynamic that it has in the metagame.
That's like the main reason they started running HPIs is just so they weren't worthless into each other, which is really funny.
Yeah. Because they're just otherwise just stare at each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, like a super good set, like really interesting. I got a little dizzy towards the end there, but you can kind of see that like 2 games potentially hinged on like very close survives.
Yeah.
Which like could potentially have changed the entire like course of the set, but also as we mentioned at some point earlier, you can look at Brendan's team and expect some bulk. So it's not like you can be like too mad about missing those kinds of KOs, because he definitely has EVs tossed, here and there to survive certain things, and then those are just kind of like the moments where your preparation, comes through, and instead of just like dropping 52 into your team builder every single time, that there's some benefit to like building out your team with some bulk, and highly valuable there.
Yeah, your point about formats getting bulkier as they go on it rings true every year, even if it's not something that is intentional. Like, oh, it's Worlds time, so now it's time to make things bulkier. That's just the trend. Just because I think people realize how valuable that kind of thing is, especially when you start establishing that there are some very specific, like very, very good Pokemon or very, very good specific combinations of Pokemon and moves and items or whatever else. So you just start teching EVs to survive those or make those matchups better, which then translates to everything else, pretty much like you just said.
Yeah, definitely. It's late format bulk and late format Gothitelle, just like death and taxes.
Yeah.
All right, so that's gonna wrap our episode for this week. I'm sorry, for this 2 weeks. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with another episode of Future Sight. So as per usual, if you have any question, comments, concerns, compliments, reminders to vote, anything that you want to hit us up with, you can find. You can put it in any of the comments below this video. You can find us on Twitter. That's pretty much it. Please don't look for me on any other social media. You will not find me. But yeah, we're always looking for recommendations. Obviously, this is one that was kind of pulled from the recommendation train. And if there are any matches that you want to see kind of like broken down, or you want like kind of a fun trip back down memory lane, we're happy to provide that for you. Just drop us a line.
And Soundproof encourages you to vote in the midterm elections.
Yeah, no, we're reminding you to vote. Don't remind us to vote. All right, so until next time, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you here with us again.